Yeah. It becomes more obvious as time goes on whether you're hearing white or black music, but you know it's from the South. A little bit of Detroit Grease playing. So I'm making this because I wanted to touch on some of this business going on with the race realism stuff that has suddenly kind of struck the skeptics and kind of and the whole community is like, Andy Warski, don't talk about this. It's verboten. It's verboten, you know. So one of the things that came up, there's a number of arguments that came up in the Destiny, Tara McCarthy, Andy Warski, JF thing. One, I want to make sure to bring up, JF was the only person who was staying on point, logical, and substantive. If you think that Destiny was anything other than sort of childish and emotional and really just kind of casting aspersions, and that was the best that he could do, then you are also probably very much along those, you're at that level of thinking, that if you were to try to really make people understand why you think what you think and then convince them to maybe change their ideas. If you fail in that, it's because you should know that if you think he can nail some arguments about genomics, which obviously he had no fundamental understanding of. And because that's what this is called. It's called genomics. What this is behavior that correlates with obvious phenotypic features and traits. Dark hair, dark or light skin, freckles, things like that. Are there things that you see that people behave a certain way? Now, this whole idea that at some point Destiny went to the point where he was like, well, I mean, why are these even races? Somebody at some point recently questioned taxonomy based on genomics, or based on the Human Genome Project. Yes, there was a story that ran on like NPR, and a bunch of the more recent period of time students of science started questioning the fundamental structure of taxonomy. This doesn't make it that Destiny can suddenly throw the entire argument out the window because he's now dealing with somebody who knows the subject, because that's what that was. Doesn't matter if he wants to think otherwise. When there's just a generation that is just kind of irrational and unmanly. And it's just really normal to be irrational and unmanly and effeminate in your thinking and doing. And so you'll just see it. You'll be like, bro, you just threw the whole argument out by arguing somewhere at some point someone qualified question taxonomy itself. Whoop-de-fucking-do. No, you have to stand and fight. And you got knocked the fuck out. Jean-Francois Gariepy knocked you the fuck out. Tara McCarthy, the whole issue that set off somebody like Destiny gets set off, and it is for real. I was there in the 90s when people you went toe to toe in the street with people who thought like this. People fought for these kinds of ideas. They actually really were like, what are you doing in this neighborhood kind of business? That really happened. So it's like, what? You have a problem with us because we're us and you're one of your group. And in the present generation sort of gets this, depending on where you went to school, the surroundings you were in. And that's why you're seeing the alt-right. These are people who they have dealt with, we are us, and you are the white person who we are now going to fuck with. Because we are thinking like, fuck with one, fuck with all. And people just don't get this. They don't listen to old punk rock. They don't listen to real punk rock. Nobody listens to Iron Cross. You fuck with one, you fuck with all. Like, you guys don't listen to Agnostic Front. You know, it's like, it's all these weird hot topic bands, which I don't really know anything about, but they're all very gay, and they're not really punk rock. They're just gay. So because of this, I was sitting back and I'm like, okay, yeah, you're trying to punk out a chick because she's doing what women would do in this case. See, you weren't there to see this happen in the 90s, where there were a lot of women who were like, I don't like how my once peaceful neighborhood has become diverse and dangerous. And I'm going to move out to the countryside with people like me and my friends. This happened. Now, there's some places where people formed like compounds and shit. There looks like this was also a coordinated deep state thing. This is why so many people talk about Richard Spencer and NPI and a lot of stuff, like there might be coordination. But the classic concept of coordination from the old lexicon of the Communist Party and the government coordinating with other groups to get certain ends in society, or against the government, like however it works, the party and other parties all coordinating to get certain things happening. And people don't want to take that serious because it's recorded history. It's a method that was used by Trump supporters to win, and you just don't want to know you got outdone by a technique you haven't learned. That's okay. You were attempting to pull off. This is the thing when I was watching Destiny. I'm like, I'm watching you. You're attempting to duck, dodge, and squirm from out under the weight of an idea that, unfortunately, and I think in my deepest thoughts, I think this troubles Jews because Jews know they believe this. They know they think this. They know why the alt-right exists, because their whole history is sort of being understood as a group separate of society, and that they must stay separate of society. That's what makes them the group they are. And this is hard for them. I mean, imagine on one side of the table you have the Orthodox uncle, and on the other side of the table you have the person who's getting involved in entertainment. And this would divide families probably for a generation or two. That's why you see on the West Coast the idea of all these people who you would later learn they were East Coast Jews who had moved out to the West Coast to get into Hollywood and show business. Well, yeah, so they could live how they wanted and not have to live Orthodox or Reformed or have people talking about them in the community and stuff. Now they could get successful, and and they were kind of bad Jews, but not, it's like maybe one day they'll come back around. There's always hope. The way Hollywood even formed, with various characters playing consistently various roles, and that this couldn't have been without the Jews who ran Hollywood. And that this is well known if you actually know about the history of the Hollywood studios. There is no like, oh, that's a horrible stereotype. No, this is a wonderful thing that the Jews created, the very concept of cinema as we know it. There was the East Coasters, but then it was Hollywood and those 6 families that, made dreams. We lived dreams. Video games simply would not have been without this base framework of a certain type of audio-visual experience. What kind of mind does that? There's a lot of peoples in the world who had access to a lot of things, but this was a whole step beyond. And it was an improvement on an idea from a former group of people, the Edison people, because they couldn't shoot their movies and distribute them on the East Coast because of some kind of patent and legal stuff that was going on with the Edisons. This evidences not only are people who are all from about a 600 diameter circle in Eastern Europe, forming 6 studios, obviously a group of people with a similar capacity for storytelling and a love for it, and then creating not just storytelling, but be able to find the theatrical talent to do so. After taking an idea that they had found other people employing and using that great idea and doing it a similar and different way. This is how races change and advance. Why is it that you can't find almost a carpet company that the name is not either Assyrian or Persian? Like if you look at, go around your city and look at all the companies that are the oldest carpet installers, carpet shampooers, carpet firms. It maybe over about the last 10 years this has changed. But I mean, to this day in Eugene, Oregon, the biggest carpet distributors, if I remember, I think they're Syrian or Lebanese. They've been famous for this for hundreds of years. Levi's, Ben Davis, Williams Dickinson, Clothiers, Sears, Macy's, linens. Jews heavily involved in clothing and linens for generations, to the point that Levi's is a term we use for jeans. They made denim a fashion with the help of the generation gap, or the gap as it's known now. But different races will happen upon each other, will share ideas and exchange ideas depending upon if the groups end up jiving. Some groups don't end up jiving. We have famously, what was it? I think it's the Comanches. The Comanches were famously very bloodthirsty, and they were not a group that you could share a whole lot of high ideas with. This is, there's people who they could go back to ancient Greece and talk about groups like this. Right now, there isn't like a generation of black people who are of the standard of the Harlem Renaissance. That just doesn't exist. There is no Duke Ellington right now in the black community. People rise and people fall depending upon how the environment changes. The welfare state has vastly changed the environment around black Americans, and that's why you're seeing the outcomes change so much. 75% out of wedlock births, that's just simply, it was 5% in 1952 or 1950. In 1890, freed blacks were literate 60% and beyond. This is a myth that black people were just like, oh no, the white man, they always roll us up and take all our money. No, that's not true. This is a dream of people who came into the United States in the 1900s. This is really, I've actually started to determine that there are a large enough portion of white Americans who came into the United States in the early 1900s, usually after World War I, and that these people know nothing experientially about blacks and whites and their history together in the United States. They still to this day understand nothing about cultural groups within the United States itself. Some people, and I mean, because my dad's people have been here since I think it was 1690s, and so it's like, I mean, I go way back, and so it, without having some sense of that, and everything I know about population groups, most of it was stuff that my father had clued me into about why is Bugs Bunny talking like that. Oh, okay, he's talking like A, and he would tell me the history of the Okies. Or he'd tell me the history of, okay, in this portion of the South, there's this, but there's, you see these French people, blah, 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 and stuff like that. All these groups matter because they've been there and in large numbers for long amounts of time, and not every group travels around a lot. Black Americans that I grew up with in San Francisco returned to the South. This means they were out of the South for 1.5 generations. And returned to the South because they literally did not like the way that West Coast white liberals behaved. It was too strange, fundamentally. They liked the more traditional way they saw of life in Atlanta, Georgia. White liberals, the white left, the Baizuo, as the Chinese are now calling you all, you all really will not deal with how different groups are and how ethnic minorities understand themselves to be different than white people. And that some of these groups are more likely to keep it in-house. They won't breed like rabbits. The more likely they are to keep it in-house, the more likely they are to be people who will actually have very conservative patterns of breeding and passing wealth on from generation to generation. If the environment forces or incentivizes, actually not forces, incentivizes such behavior, you tend to get this out of the best and brightest. And this is why you had a generation of people like Duke Ellington, that you had actually an environment that made the best survive. And that's a big part of like Black soul music, the kind of music I collect. Are messages of achievement, not messages of woe and the white man make me feel so bad. That's weak people's talk. That's the talk of people who don't pull their pants up and think that their sneakers speak for them. Africa has a very specific issue as a continent that is remarkably bizarre. And what it is that Africa has a very smooth shore. This is extraordinarily important for people to understand. It also has almost no mountain ranges. This means that water just blows right over the whole continent. It stays in clouds. It does not, it rains for a very specific amount of time and then it's done. The rivers are dry like that. There are no deep water ports. There's no mountain ranges, so there's no water going from up here to down here, chipping away at stone and revealing metals. Taking apart rocks, releasing, say, gas fissures and stuff like that, so that people will suddenly realize there's gas in something, or that gas comes out and forms crystals along like rock as it's blowing out and stuff, so that you could gather. Believe that's one of the ways you could gather a certain form of chlorine, if I remember correctly, in the old days. You don't have stuff, pulling like the cinnabar out of the sand and stuff like that, So, because you don't have the same way that the water will extract resources, there's a whole bunch of other shit that therefore can't happen. One of the most important is without stuff like mountain ranges and ways that you can naturally corral animals, you also get animals that are meant to survive in an area in savanna and grasslands and in forests that dry out, is that you get these animals that are extremely powerful. And to this day, humans are still having problems with lions in Africa. They have problems with them. That like a lion, you won't know where it came from. It's a huge on top of it. We don't picture Africa as the size it is. America would fit in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, 3 times the contiguous states. So this is really something where we're not dealing with. There's no deep water ports for 3 times the United States, and no deep water ports. I mean, who knows? Maybe beautiful beaches, but you have to take a boat out to another boat. So dealing with cargo is extra expensive. You have lions in the way of your roads. You have big animals, just big ass animals that will charge you and fuck you up all over the place. You have all kinds of crazy snakes. Everything's hungry all the time because of the way the environment is. And on top of it, you have insects that are extraordinarily dangerous. And that anytime you traverse too far inland, you usually find some illness that's been forgotten by almost every species until you suddenly uncover it. Oh, well, how about that? Like there's this horrible illness that you can get when you go far enough into the jungles of the Congo. And so this is why a lot of claims about the colonial era are bullshit. White people could not, for 100 years, really do a lot inland of Africa because they couldn't survive. There were no bison. They would have to bring everything. Colonies everything had to be brought there. There was almost nothing that they could actually use in the area. There wasn't there wasn't the metals. There weren't all of that had to be done, and people don't want to face that, and they don't want to face that there were very few Africans because of how difficult this was in the sub-Saharan area. There's just not that many. There weren't teeming numbers. That only happened within the last 100 years as the Green Revolution in the United States transferred over to Africa. We've been feeding that continent now. Now, in the 80s and 90s were chock full of Help Africa because they had normal weather for Africa. But what it was government instability usually someplace, and it was usually a Marxist, militant African, militant tribal takeover of a government that was European in nature in some way, and everyone wore suits, and now everybody wears like cheap fatigues, and their flag has a Kalashnikov on it. And this is one of these things that it's look up the Ethiopiques, look up Afrobeat, Mulatu, Mulatu, and then look up Afrobeat, and you'll hear music like you never imagined. And it's like, no, Africa was jamming, Africa was popping for a minute, and then the Marxists and the Islamists ruined everything. And there's injustice all upon the land, man. But it's like, I mean, black people were more widely literate in the 1950s in English than Latvians were in either Latvian or Russian. This is just one of these things that people aren't getting. Different countries excel depending on what the environment is, who they're interacting with, and if they need. Did the Estonians need to read? Did the Estonians need anything other than Germans running their country and Russians running their country, did they need it? Well, once the 1900s came along, they did need it. Once the communists took over, well, then they definitely needed it, and they need to know how to read Cyrillic. But do they know did they have anything written from the Estonian language in Estonian that Estonians read? Well, for black people, by the 1950s, they had long since had a music industry. And James Brown was flying around in a private jet to perform for black people for money. You should learn more about what you think you know, Destiny, about race and history, because you've been very poorly educated on it. And what you really understand from popular culture obviously is pretty, it's a pretty narrow perspective. You need to go back further. You need to learn who Red Fox was, well, you need to read maybe the autobiography of Malcolm X so you could really understand what Malcolm X dated a white woman. And don't rewatch the movie, read the fucking book. You have to read. The documentaries are one thing, but you got to read. Wouldn't hurt to so there you go. Now, as far as any kind of writings on this, the best right now, really, that I've found he's so great because he's so consistent. Or no, let's just go through a handful of them. They're the best that I've. So there's a Carlin. There's one that Hunt something, and now it's gone. It was so clear in my head too, but a Carlin is one, a Carlin 88 or a Carlin, I believe. There's a guy on Twitter, Yayo, Yeyo, I think Yayo Za, and he's actually a really good person to find. It's just studies. It's just the raw data with a little bit of commentary, and I think he writes. Razib Khan, you look up Genomics, Razib Khan, UNZ Review, UNZ Review, J-Man's, his columns running all the time on genomics and human biodiversity, and most importantly, behavioral genetics. That's really what everything's about, behavioral genetics, because something people don't understand, the Han, the ruling tiers of Chinese society for quite a bit of time were chosen by IQ exam. Look it up. A form of it. Their own exams, but the royal exam of China. And it's fundamentally a form of IQ test. People don't want to think this. They don't want to, but it's like, no. That's, if you had read the bell curve, you would understand that the SAT is a form of IQ test. It's a form of it. Every test you ever took is a form of IQ test. It's supposed to filter out those who can't, so that those who can move on and challenge their raw intelligence with more and more specialized knowledge. So I would also suggest you get a little understanding of that, because understanding how all this has been done and known, and that then there's groups like the Jews who have actual groups that are the literate priestly class, and then the ritual priestly class, and that they breed a certain way, that they have they absolutely seal their genetics, and so then you have the Kohanim diploid, where there's a big search for groups that have high concentrations of the Kohanim diploid. Seeing how people chose for intelligence and capacity and merit, where we now put merit as, oh, you don't have legs, well, you could still kick it, you don't have arms, you could still hang, and where, because life must be hard with no arms, but it's like, no, this person can't, if your club curls in the squat cage and this person has no arms, you can't include them. They can't do it. And that's what society now is becoming, with people who want to constantly obfuscate, move the goalposts, and come up with phony ass bullshit snarkery arguments about race. And Tara McCarthy is going all the way to what women do. Well, what should we do about this? What matters to me? What matters to me and women like me? Because that's what happens. If you have feminism, Notice how they behave, and then it's like, no. So once their issue is ethnic identity, and I told people the white women are who's going to get Trump elected. Then everybody got mad because the white women got Trump elected. And I'm like, oh yeah, don't worry. No, they're going to get even more angry as you all are unapologetic about getting Trump elected, and that the rewards of such behavior start filtering to you, and you all start having a sudden, bunch of babies. Which I could tell you right now, where I work, I get to see lots of white women suddenly are pregnant. So this is just one of these things that you have to know things about people's histories, and it takes time. It takes time. Someone like Jean-Francois knows raw data about genetics. You should ask him questions. That's the best thing you can do. Ask him questions, smart questions. When it comes to Tara McCarthy, ask her, if it's really this thing of, but what are you thinking of doing? Forced removal, simply not going to happen. The Republic is going to stand because it's pragmatic, period. It's going to keep white women happy. Some radically different form of government that would require all kinds of violent change, that's no. The white women aren't going to like that. The white women are something bred out of pragmatism. They are not hothouse flowers. They were bred out of pragmatic, long cultivation. So this is one of those things. And so it's going to take a while, but things are going to change. And they're going to change because society has decided that they were sold a bill of goods on the types of incentives for behavior, and they were sold mostly mind reading. The Destiny was particular on this one. He's from the school of secular Hebrews who thinks they can read people's minds because they read some psychology books. That mind reading and a whole lot of sort of bullshit about what people's real motives are. And now that we have praxeology and Austrian economics, and that we have the internet, so we could have people talk about what their traditional view of human motivation is, we have much better vocabulary forming for a lot of this. And behavioral genetics is now starting to form absolute language for this. And so it'll take at least another 10 to 15 years. That's why a lot of this, they'll have stuff in your brain controlling your thoughts. There's some problems with that. It's because we're still not honest about IQ overall. And so we're not being honest about how the brain functions and how people could actually use cognition, how they could refine their cognitive processes. We aren't dealing with that at all. We still have aspects of completely rational parts of the Christian community that will not deal with how we understand cognition, and they just won't do it. They will and they won't. They will and they won't. They'll talk about how porn affects your cognition. They won't talk about how meditation benefits your cognition, and they'll talk about it as if it's something foreign when they're wrong. It's something that Europeans knew about. That's why they have a word for it. Yeah, just some thoughts on race realism and the Destiny, Jean-Francois Gariepy, and Tara McCarthy debate.